Well, we're living in a profoundly indignant time, and we're seeing everywhere in the world, but I can speak for Latin America, the failed responses of our governments and the dissonance between the majorities in Latin America on the one hand and our governments, which have acted really slowly, not because they're being cautious in the face of a changing world, but seemingly because of lack of direction. I wouldn't want to go further than that, but there are some really difficult problems that we're facing. And sometimes I think that these governments, to generalize the governments of Latin America, have contempt for us. And just to speak generally, but nevertheless, it becomes insulting at one point that our advances move so slowly. And we've heard so much in the way of talk about a tide of progressive governments. Everyone wants to celebrate that we've had so many elections of so-called progressive and leftist leaders in recent years. But I don't fully subscribe to that analysis. And I think we have great challenges ahead of us in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I think that, I bear some responsibility in, pushing back and sharing, some of my views on this and pushing it back against the blind, unchecked optimism, because things are only optimistic if we're actually moving in the right direction. So we have a long ways to go in Latin America. Salaries continue to be low here. Living conditions are humble for the average person. We don't have equitable access to technology as compared with countries like China, with countries like Europe and North America that have really hindered our right to development throughout all of these centuries. And there's still a massive discrepancy in the way school children learn here in Latin America, and so forth. And so the mere election of these progressive governments doesn't convert a country into one that exudes progress. We are not just the mere election of a government doesn't allow us to move in the direction of China, for example, just because we elected these people. Unfortunately, it feels like we're stumped at some points, at some times. And so, few countries in our region have actually managed to free themselves from the Monroe Doctrine. And that arrangement of dominion, that arrangement of domination primarily by the United States. And when you see how much China and other countries have achieved, and knowing the reality of how people live on a whole in the United States and Europe, it's a little discouraging, and it feels like we're just moving very slowly in our development. And so the certainty and the blueprint that's provided by China and the BRI is the silver lining. It's unfortunate, I would say. It's something to celebrate, but it's unfortunate that that we don't necessarily have other means other than joining forces with these other world powers, specifically, of course, Russia and Iran, in addition to China. And so many important infrastructures have been recently, infrastructure projects have been recently signed between the Nicaraguan government and the government of China, and Chinese companies, all within the last year and a half, really, as Nicaragua relaunched relationships, reopened relationships with China following that period in which, since the neoliberal governments, Nicaragua had that relation with China. And so things are moving very quickly. And so some of the most important infrastructure projects that we're seeing now are the construction of an international airport, a railway, 2 hydroelectric projects, a thermal project, and more roads and new public transport units. These are all very important. And just to use Nicaragua as an example, because of course, there are almost all countries in Latin America and the Caribbean have joined the BRI, and the maybe 2 that haven't have BRI projects. But it's going to really transform the government or transform Nicaragua as a country because of the way in which this country already has some very important things. It has economic and political stability, and is very attractive right now to foreign investment. And I think it's that high degree of trust between the two governments is going to allow for things to really develop very quickly. And so the railway building was one of the most recent announcements. Nicaraguan government officials recently announced that they're going to be building a railway with China, which will become the country's main commercial route. And there's actually two railway mega projects that will be linking different cities. Nicaragua is also advancing in a deep water port project in the Nicaraguan Caribbean. And as that advances, the government will work with Chinese state companies to build these cross-country railways to serve the interests of Nicaragua and the Nicaraguan people and the needs of Nicaragua right now, but also to be put at the service of companies and international transactions for interoceanic trade, trade transactions for the entire continent, for the entire region, particularly given the reality of the difficulties of the Panama Canal related to climate change and other factors. And this option right now of building the railway across Nicaragua is the most viable, and it has the most potential for success that exists right now in Central America and our region in general. So it's very exciting, to say the least. And this is why the United States right now is pursuing Nicaragua with such a high degree of hostility and aggression, and unfortunately to the silence of many governments of the region. They're also improving public transportation. Nicaragua has partnered with both Russia and China, but most recently, a couple fleets of Chinese buses that have been purchased have arrived in the country. These are modern buses. The buses that the regular people use in Nicaragua for mass public transit are extraordinarily old. They're older than I am. And they have a lot of problems, to say the least. And so obviously at a low cost, a very fair cost, Nicaragua has been able to acquire all of those vehicles and is very quickly getting rid of, in no time at all, practically overnight, getting rid of the old vehicles and bringing in these new Chinese vehicles to update our public transport system. It's a huge advance. People are very happy about that. And a new airport. So we recently, very recently, this is all happening right now, but heard the announcement of a contract for the reconstruction, expansion, and improvement of the Punta Huete International Airport. And it's a terminal that will become the main international airport for the country. It's expected in the first 3 years to manage almost 4 million passengers, and 2,000 flights in a year, and it's going to have a much longer runway, which is not possible to expand at the main international airport in Managua right now. This is going to be in a really good optimal location with harmony for the environment, and it'll allow Nicaragua to further open internationally. It's really important, among other things, including investment and business. Nicaragua actually does need, it does require a bit of tourism to sustain its economy. It is very important. I don't know that people know that tourism is such an important factor, but it is really important. The government does want to invite people here. It's a beautiful country with high degrees of security and safety, but it does need that critical infrastructure. And this airport will be very important to that. What the country has right now is this legendary small airport in Managua, the Augusto C. Centeno Airport, with tiny airport and, like I said, a short runway. So this is going to be a huge advance. Also, Nicaragua and China, it's important to say, signed a free trade agreement in August, and it was negotiated in under a year. It's the most important achievement in the bilateral cooperation since the resumption of diplomatic relations, and it's expected to further stimulate the potential investment and trade and cooperation, and open for broader prospects for cooperation between the two countries. Recently, marking the 10-year anniversary of the BRI, CGTN spoke with Michael Campbell. Michael Campbell was a very important minister here in Nicaragua. He's now the ambassador in Beijing, and he spoke to CGTN, and he was asked why it was so distinct, this relationship between Nicaragua and China. And he said that because of the history of interventionism and aggressions from the United States and other countries, that Nicaragua hasn't been able to take full advantage of the geographic location and natural resources. But now with working with China, we can see those important efforts to become the Nicaragua that we really want, he says, and that it's really important for the growth not only of Nicaragua, but of the Central American region. He said that in the case of Latin America and the Caribbean, one second, it's a little loud. In the case of Latin America and the Caribbean, because of projects like the BRI, trade and foreign direct investment between the region and China has grown exponentially. Trade represents $450 billion in 2021, and it has to do so because of China's respectful engagement and cooperation based on solidarity and mutual respect. It's creating important opportunities. He said this was never provided by the United States and the Monroe Doctrine. Unfortunately, that was Ambassador Michael Campbell, the Nicaraguan ambassador in Beijing. And so, the United States is very concerned about the ways in which things are very quickly changing in our region. Our region has quickly established ties with China in recent years. Panama in 2017, El Salvador in 2018. That was under the FML. That was under the FMLN government, and of course, most recently Honduras. And so the government of Xiomara Castro is quickly building a comprehensive agenda with China since the opening of ties this year, and that's been extraordinarily important. We're seeing those agreements being signed today with the foreign minister of Honduras, I think, was back in Beijing this week, and they're also working to negotiate a free trade agreement. So these are some of the exciting things that are taking place. To put a focus on Central America and not South America so much as we normally see, but it has been an extremely important last couple of years in terms of strengthening that relationship, and is providing, like I said, that silver lining and a sense of optimism for the way in which we can potentially really begin to advance from not just celebrating mere elections of progressives, but really put forth a concrete agenda towards really fixing things that are wrong, things that are lagging behind, and move forward in this supposed multipolar world that's coming.